Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. So this is kind of sci-fi, kind of horror a little bit. It's a short story collection, so there's quite a few genres that it fits into as well. But yeah, let's get into this. So The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury is a collection of sci-fi short stories set within this framing narrative of the illustrated man. And really the illustrated man and what makes him so interesting and what that story is his tattoos. And so this framing narrative is the illustrated man and his tattoos and how that affects each of these stories that we're going to see. And it's not really like a direct effect. It's more of they are the catalyst for the stories being told in a way. Like basically the stories being told, you can assume are tattoos on the illustrated man, and that's not exactly right because of how it all works out, but that's not so important. Anyways, what is important is that these short stories are set within this framing narrative of the illustrated man and his tattoos. And though this framing narrative exists and has its own stories that's going on, it is not at all the primary story of this book, meaning the illustrated man and his tattoos are not the primary storyline of this book. They're not the primary through line of this book and what this book is trying to talk about or tell a story about. This book is really, it's an exploration of the future, of space travel, of the colonization of Mars, what leads us there, and really all around it's about humanity. There's a lot more to it than just, oh, there's this interesting looking fella. And that's very important for how this book is constructed. Before I continue on though, I just quickly like to say, welcome to an Erudite adventure. I'm T. If you're liking what you're seeing from us, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we will continue on with this review here. So this is I believe the fifth of Bradbury's books that I've read. I know it's at least number 5. It might be number 6, but I don't believe so. I believe it's number 5 of the Bradbury books that I've read. And it's one where I really wasn't sure what it was going to be about, which is actually the fairly common when I go into most books, but Bradbury especially. I don't know what they're going to be about because with the exception of Fahrenheit 451, which I've heard so much about, I really don't know anything about any of the rest of his stories. And so this was one where I went into it knowing nothing about it, which I really enjoy approaching stories that way, is going into them without knowing anything. So I didn't know what it was going to be about. It was free on Audible, and so I picked it up at the same, well, I don't know if they're just audiobooks that are free on Audible or if they were only free for a certain amount of time or what was going on with them. But I picked up a whole bunch of Ray Bradbury books at one point on Audible because they were free, and so I just added them to the library type thing to get to when I wanted to read them. So I picked this one up and several others, and then it had been a while since I'd last read a Bradbury, not terribly long, but a little while, and I'd wanted to continue. I'd wanted to read another one, and so I love the way he writes. I love the atmosphere that he has, that he includes in all of his stories, and then the way that he explores themes within these fascinating and imaginative stories. So all of those things I was like, yeah, I think it's time for another Bradbury, which I'm about due for another one, but I'm trying to, this is an aside, this is not part of my notes. I'm trying to get to the review before I read another book in that series or author, something like that. So I'm trying to stay a little bit more caught up and not blending my thoughts so much on books that I have read when I have more than one book that I need to review type thing. So that's the idea with this. I am due for another Bradbury read at this point. But then also this one being titled The Illustrated Man, I was curious to know if it had anything to do with the character of the same name that plays a role in Something Wicked This Way Comes, because the illustrated man there is fairly creepy, fairly dark storyline with that character and all that. But I wanted to see if this was the same illustrated man, if it was just a concept that Bradbury wanted to use again to explore some other story. I didn't know what he was doing with it, but I wanted to see. That's what I was intrigued by this, specifically by this title for, and why I wanted to pick this one up rather than a different one at the time. Ultimately, whether it does or not, meaning whether it does have anything to do with that illustrated man and Something Wicked This Way Comes, really doesn't matter. It just straight up, it does not matter. It has no effect on the story that's being told here at all. And that actually made it all the more interesting to me. I was also unaware of the fact that it was a collection, meaning a collection of short stories, when I decided to pick it up. That very very quickly became evident as soon as you read the first part and it starts and stops and goes into a new storyline, a new short story, and then that short story ends and it goes into the next short story. As soon as you do a couple of those, you're like, oh, this is a short story collection, and it makes sense and it works, and I have no problem with that. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't know that was going to be the case before actually getting into it. But like I mentioned, the stories are about humanity and the future, and as I've found to be the case with each of Bradbury's books, each story is chock full of truth. Whether the predictions have actually come to pass or not, they contain so much truth in them, and that makes them worth reading. But with that is also a level of horror, which is very intentional. It's often in more than just the construction of the story. It's not like these horror elements are brought into the story or the genre of the short story. That's not how what I'm talking about when I say this is a horror collection as well. But it's in the thoughts, it's in the themes, the explorations. And to me that made this book so incredibly special, because though it was horror, it wasn't like bad or gross or terrifying or anything like that. It was thoughtful. And that's oftentimes more scary than any monster ever could be. It's been since November since I read this book, so I definitely don't remember each of the individual stories contained within the collection at this point. But I remember being fascinated with Bradbury's construction like the layout of the book, and the way that they built upon what had come before, even if there wasn't any form of chronology. They were compiled thematically so that when we get to the end of the book and we finally reach the story titled The Illustrated Man, it all makes sense and his story becomes so much more impactful. And that's really what this book is. It's not a chronological exploration where he sees something that's the very, very near future and then gradually gets further and further out into the future. No, it's just these random snapshots from sometime we've already long since colonized Mars. Sometimes we're just landing on Mars. Sometimes it's just a few days in the future or whatever. And there's no linear chronology to that. It's just bouncing back and forth, telling the story that is necessary in order for the themes to progress through this story that's being told. And then we arrive at the story titled The Illustrated Man, which even that, there's no guarantee, and in fact I would go so far as to say probably doesn't directly influence, it probably is not the same Illustrated Man as the book is named after, who is even again probably a different character than is the Illustrated Man in Something Wicked This Way Comes. So it's very interesting how that all turned out. That's very non-important to anything though, but it's just something that the way that my brain interpreted each of those stories was that these are all different characters that just happen to be illustrated men. Bradbury likes to have like magic in his worlds, and it's a magic of essentially human imagination, and that is exactly what is here in The Illustrated Man as well. It's the magic of art, even with something that to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of in real life, is being tattoos. I'm not much of a fan of them, but I love how they can be used in stories to tell stories or to influence the magic system or whatever it might be. I really appreciate them within stories. I just don't like them that much in real life. And seeing how they can be used to tell a story and the artistry that went into them, plus the fact that we are faced with questions about what happens when we have to tell the stories ourselves. It's really an incredible read in the way that all ties together with this human imagination human imagination and creativity and drive to move forward and towards something better, but then in the meantime we oftentimes make it worse instead of better. And there's a whole lot that goes into it, but it's very interesting, and I appreciated it so much. Also the artistry of it, I appreciated seeing that and having that story be told. Is absolutely one of my favorite books that I read last year, and it really just reinforces that Bradbury is one of my favorite authors. Even with having read so few books by him, he's just absolutely one of my favorite authors, and I cannot wait to read more from him. And like I mentioned, it's about time to read another one by him, especially now that I've reviewed this one. So I will hopefully do that sooner rather than later. I just need to pick which one I want to read. So anyways, that is my review of The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. We have our social medias linked in the description down below. We will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.